It's a challenging time for us all with regard to sequestration, the continuing resolution, and ultimately, if we have to furlough the workforce, it'll be a tremendous challenge for us to maintain the mission at the same time, take care of the civilians that are part of this great team here at the Army Reserve headquarters. I think it's very important for each and every member of the Army Reserve team, both military, our civilians, and our families that are out there, to fully appreciate that the team at the highest levels, Chief of the Army Reserve level, is fully engaged in this effort in Washington and elsewhere around the country, articulating what the impact would be, on our mission and on our individual, soldiers and family members and our civilians, if this should come about, and doing the best job possible, to make the case for, why it shouldn't occur. If directed, to execute a furlough by the Department of Defense, we will obviously, move out and do that to the best of our ability in a way that, again, allows us to continue the mission, but at the same time, does as much as we can to take care of the individual civilians that will be affected most directly, by this situation. As far as the impact is concerned on the Army Reserve, it will touch each and every member of the Army Reserve. We're part of a team, and so if one element, in this case the civilian workforce, is affected, by a furlough, it's going to have an impact on those others that are there accomplishing the mission on a day-to-day basis. And so right now we're looking at approximately 12,500 civilians throughout the Army Reserve, which includes both our military technicians and also our Department of the Army civilians that would potentially be affected if we're required, to furlough the civilian workforce. Right now, from the overall sequestration effort for fiscal year 13, so now through the end of FY13, which takes us to the end of September, we're looking at about $292 million of the Army Reserve budget for fiscal year 13 that will be affected. And that'll be basically in op-tempo, medical readiness, depot level maintenance, and then our sustainment, restoration, and modernization programs on our Army Reserve installations and at our facilities worldwide. From a civilian furlough perspective, if we furloughed the entire workforce for 22 days of discontinuous service during the remainder of the fiscal year, that ends up being approximately $80 million of additional money that would then go toward the Army Reserve's contribution to the overall $46 billion or so that is being made up through sequestration by the Department of Defense. A lot of it goes back to one key element of how we operate, and that's as a team. And so obviously we're going to look across the board at our budget, look at the missions that we've got to determine which are the most essential and critical, to our mission on a day-to-day basis, and try as hard as we can to make sure that we match up, the financial resources with those missions, but also take into account the military and the civilian workforce that is needed to accomplish those missions, and to try to spread things out over time so that we can still get the job done with the workforce that is only going to be here 80% of the time. So there's going to be a balancing act, and what we're trying to do is to seek as much flexibility as we can for commanders and for supervisors at every level within the organization, so that they have the ability to tailor, the impact on their individual organization. And so in some cases, there may be a different approach in terms of how a furlough might be executed, for the 81st RSC, for instance, versus how, the 200th MP Command does it. But at the end of the day, there's going to be a certain level of equity in terms of the amount of time, which ends up being approximately, 1 day a week or 2 days per pay period for, a total of 16 hours, which when you add that all up, it ends up being about a 20% pay cut for our civilian workforce, which we believe will start sometime the end of April and then go on until the end of the fiscal year, sometime toward the end of September, if it remains in effect during that entire period. I'm glad you brought up the point about our civilian training and professional development, because that is something over the last 2 years that we've tried to put a lot of time, effort, and energy in, because it's important, for us to have that training and development, because it allows the civilian workforce to do a better job at their current task, but also it makes them more marketable for future positions of greater responsibility. So we want to try to preserve that for them. And so we're going to have to come up with some workarounds so that we can still meet the intent of the Department of Defense and the Secretary of Defense on this furlough, but still allow folks to go to school, get the training that they need and the development that they need. And so on a case-by-case basis, we're going to have to look at that very closely. We're also going to have to look at those training events for our civilians that we manage directly to see how we can structure those in a way that supports what's being done at the schoolhouse, because some of those trainers may also be subject to the furlough, but to set it up in a way that allows the schoolhouse functions to continue, and at the same time do it in a way that allows our civilians that might be coming from different places around the Army Reserve to conduct that training just as we have in the past. We're going to have to do it, smarter, maybe more efficiently, but the intent at this point in time is to continue as much of that training as we possibly can. There's really, and as I've spent time talking, with the workforce in the field, at OCAR, here at USARC over the course of the last week to 10 days, there's really three themes that I try to really reinforce for them, and it really impacts, again, not just on the civilians themselves, but on the military folks that are part of the team and our contract workforce that's out there as well. First and foremost, we want them to make sure that they fully understand and appreciate their current financial situation and their pay and benefits, to include leave accrual, health, medical benefits, dental, life insurance benefits, tax deductions and things like that, so that they can better assess how they will be affected by a furlough and a 20% reduction of their pay as we go into this sequestration period. And again, what we believe will happen after the appropriate notifications have been made is on or about the 23rd of April, that week we would begin the first week of the furlough. And so every week from there to the end of September, a civilian will not be, coming to work one day and they'll be without pay. So that 20% reduction over that pay period is going to add up over time. And so we want to make sure they understand, what the pay and benefits are that they have now and what effect that it might have, through that sequestration and through that furlough period. Because in some cases they may have allotments, they may have TSP that might be affected and other benefits as well. And so through awareness, that will reduce, some of the stress and tension in their lives and give them a better idea on how they can make it through that 5+ month period. I would like to put a plug in right now for the Office of Personnel Management, because they put together a very good guidebook. It's about 32 pages long, and if you go to the OPM website, you can download it, and it's a guide to the administrative furloughs, and we're also making it available very widely throughout the Army Reserve as well. So again, first and foremost, we want folks to really understand and appreciate the impact on their pay and benefits. The second thing that is equally important is good financial planning. I mean, many people do a great job already in terms of balancing, their checkbook every month and figuring out how they're going to pay their bills. But now we're going to ask them to do that same thing with 20% less money over a 5-month period. And so what we want folks to start thinking about now, today, at the end of February, is if this happened, and if on about the 23rd or so of April, they would go into this furlough process, what are some things that they need to do right now, today, to start planning for that? And we intend on putting some information out, some tips, and we also plan on setting up, some opportunities, both in person and online, for folks to get assistance from a financial planning standpoint. But again, there's little things that folks can do, in terms of maybe deferring the purchases of some, large items or a car until maybe after this period is behind us. If we're getting an income tax return this year, let's go ahead and put that in savings. Let's put that away. Maybe put a little bit more money in the savings account over the next couple of weeks and pay periods, and use that as a buffer, going into this, upcoming furlough period. So again, we've got a little bit of an opportunity right now to take some very positive steps to prepare for the future and what we're going to be faced with, going through the furlough period itself. The third And probably the greatest concern that we've got right now is the health and wellness of the force. And it goes without saying that in the life of anyone, a reduction in their pay, 20%, is significant. And so there are going to be a lot of folks out there that are really on a day-to-day basis trying to figure out how they're going to make ends meet. And so it's really incumbent upon us, leaders at every level, to have good situational awareness on who's out there within their organization that may be affected, more directly by this furlough than others, and to, engage them face to face personally, and to see what assistance, might be available, to them that we can offer to assist them. And again, we are working on some information that we think will be of use to leaders and supervisors and individuals at every level to better help them cope with the situation and to provide them some resources that they can reach out through. Ford Family, for instance, we're retooling the Ford Family structure right now, where we have a call center in this building that's mostly focused on helping families and soldiers in time of need or during deployments. But we're trying to retool that effort now so that if there's a civilian out there that has a challenge in their life, they can call into the Ford Family number 24/7, talk to someone, and then we can help identify what their situation is and then direct them to someone who might be able to help them more directly based on whatever their situation might be. And again, we've got a very good track record, I believe, today in helping out soldiers and families that have called in. So we want to try to extend that opportunity for our civilian workforce as well. But again, what keeps me up at night at the end of the day is the health and wellness of our workforce each and every day, but more importantly, as we go into this challenging time, for our civilians in particular. And it's going to be incumbent on every one of us to really be looking out for one another during this period. And we encourage folks to do that each and every day. We're in the process right now of pulling together as many resources as we possibly can to provide folks with the information that they need. We've developed a SharePoint site here within USARC, which will be accessible through our website, where folks can go and find information up to date that we're going to post. And so far we've got the OPM, Office of Personnel Management guide that I mentioned earlier, that really is a good document. It's about 32 pages long. It's a very quick read, but it goes into a lot of detail on the benefits, of an individual employee that may or may not, be impacted on, by the furlough. And so I really, highlight that to folks and encourage each and every civilian, and many of those military folks out there that supervise civilians ought to get a copy of that document, read it online or download it, take it home, and really study it so that they have a good appreciation for what's going on in the lives of individuals. We're also going to post frequently asked questions on that site, and then possibly add other links that folks can use to go to places to provide additional resources, such as I mentioned earlier, the financial planning, in particular. We are in the process right now of organizing several seminars here at this headquarters that will go into the pay and benefits piece, the financial planning piece, and then also look at health and wellness issues. And what my intent is if at all possible to try to tape those presentations with the intent to also be able to have those available on that SharePoint site as well. So, and if not, provide other information that we're using to pull those information sessions together, because it's easier for us to do it here with a large audience at USARC and even up at OCAR. But I'm equally, if not more, concerned about the individual civilians that are out there in the field and how we reach out to them and provide them those same resources that we're able to pull together here at USARC. Let me just talk about sequestration in general, because I think there's a lot of misperceptions out there on what it is and what it isn't. But essentially, enacted into law, sequestration came about that would mandate certain cuts to not only the Department of Defense budget, but the budgets throughout the federal government. It was initially intended to begin on the 1st of January of this year. Congress deferred the start date to 1 March, and so now we're basically going to make up some of that difference such that the cuts will again begin on the 1st and be projected out over the entire remainder of the fiscal year. And right now the programmed amount for the DOD at large is about $46 billion. The Army Reserve part of that is about $292 million out of our $8 billion budget, and then probably another $80 million contribution made up if we furloughed all of our employees, for 22 discontinuous days between now and the end of the fiscal year. And so right now, what is being targeted is the ability of the federal government using these different tools to come up with that $46 billion for this fiscal year. But sequestration as a whole is a much longer term proposition which goes out over the course of the next 10 years. And so in order to make up some very short-term amounts of money, the certain procedures were put in place that included reductions in our op tempo, our depot level maintenance, medical readiness, and then our sustainment restoration modernization programs, and the furlough to get us to the numbers that we needed to get to for the reductions in FY13. Where we're going to go in terms of FY14 and beyond with regard to a furlough is unknown. But currently the furlough planning only takes us through the end of this fiscal year. And I think as we go through the remainder of the fiscal year, we'll then determine, okay, is a furlough, a continued furlough required, or are some other measures required with regard to the civilian personnel workforce? From the Army Reserve perspective, we do not anticipate having to do that in terms of the dollars that we've been apportioned for our civilian pay. We think that in the out years, starting in 14 and beyond, we'll be able to man the force as it's currently structured, with some modifications based on force structure changes that happen every year. So that's the future as we know it right now, and as more information becomes available, we'll be providing that to the field as well. One of the things I think it's important for folks to look at from the Army Reserve perspective is the fact that we have already taken some important reductions in the Army Reserve. When you look out across the whole DOD and the whole Department of the Army, we're one of the few organizations that has already brought our civilian manning levels down below the FY10 level, which has been the guidance from the Secretary all along. So we're already below fiscal year 10 levels. We've got our funding and resources in place to support those individuals that are currently authorized for duty as civilians, both Miltechs and our Department of the Army civilians right now. So from our perspective, we think we're in a pretty good position with regard to achieving the goals that the Secretary set for the entire department. And so as we go into 14 and beyond, I think that we, more than any other organization in the Army, are in the best shape possible as further reductions might occur throughout the workforce. We've already met those goals, and I think can stand behind what we've done. But there is an unknown out there, and in some cases, when reductions are made, throughout the Department of Defense and throughout the Army, they look at all three components: active, guard, and reserve. And in some cases, there's a shared burden there. But again, based on the good work that we've done thus far, I think we'll be able to make a very strong argument that we have, met the goals that they've set for us, that we are essentially a very good force when you look at your return on the investment.